Hi guys, you're watching the umashow.com, and as you know, the Uma Show is all about loving yourself, believing in your dreams and being inspiring to live a very happy, healthy and a positive life. Today on the show we are discussing diabetes. Diabetes is really on the rise because the choices we make on a daily basis in terms of our lifestyle and the stress levels. So I'm with Carolina, and she's going to give us a lot of information that will really help you if you are diabetic or if you have anybody in your family who's diabetic.
Yep.
So let's start. I want to know myself, what's the difference between type A and type 2?
So we've got, sometimes it's called type A, type B, or it's often referred to as type 1 and type 2. So they're actually very different conditions. Type 1 is essentially an autoimmune disease that you're either born with, you can develop it, normally it shows by about the age of 30, and it's where the immune system attacks the cells in the pancreas, which is an organ we have inside us. These cells are responsible for secreting a hormone called insulin. Insulin helps us to absorb and use the carbohydrates we eat. So when the immune system attacks these cells, it's no longer present. And eventually the immune system will destroy all of them. They no longer have these cells, so they no longer produce insulin at all. And when they eat carbohydrates, they absorb them through the bowel and then they just circulate in the blood. There's no way of actually utilizing them without that hormone. Type 2 is something that you develop. So essentially what happens is the insulin is there, but it's not working, and working to a great extent.
How do we manage diabetes? Because if with our lifestyle choices we can.
Yes. So with type 1, you would be subject to injecting insulin still.
Right.
But what common factor does occur between the two types is that lifestyle is a big factor within it. Big factor, and essentially it's the carbohydrates that you eat. Insulin is responsible for utilizing the carbohydrate, like I said earlier. And essentially, the carbohydrates that you eat then are what you would need to manage the condition. So the portion control is a big factor within diabetes management. And a lot of the time, people don't realize just how much carbohydrate they're eating. And unfortunately, the satiety with carbohydrates, people often like to feel full. And they can often eat for quite a while until you feel that satiety. And by then, it's already too much, especially for someone with diabetes.
Right.
The second thing would be the form of the carbohydrate.
Okay.
So we have simple and complex. But even the complex carbohydrates, the more refined carbohydrate is, the worse it can be for your blood sugar. In technical terms, this is essentially what we call glycemic index and glycemic load. This is a term that's actually been used quite a lot recently, and I've seen it starting to emerge on products, and it will say things like low GI or low glycemic load. The glycemic index is indicating the rate at which the carbohydrate will go into the blood.
Right.
So, for example, a slice of white bread it's got a very high glycemic index. It's digested very easily. It's essentially a lump of carbohydrate. It's a lump of glucose, essentially. And it will go into the blood very quickly. Doesn't involve a lot of digestion, and therefore it's in the blood, circulated at quite high levels. If someone struggles with their insulin response, if someone's type 1, for example, they would need to account with their injection. And if someone's struggling with type 2 and that the response is not occurring, these kind of foods aggravate the condition.
Right, okay.
So something with a lower glycemic index
is always better.
Is better, yes, because the rate at which it's going into the blood and how rapid and how much is going in there is what's important. For example, watermelon has got quite a high GI.
Right.
Because of the sugars within it.
Sugar.
And yeah, it's quite easily digested. However, the glycemic load is considered fairly low because you normally only ever have, say, a slice, generally.
Yes.
That's if people stick to portion. So the load is not a huge impact on the system. There's like a mild response because there's a sugar that goes into the blood quite quickly, but then it should only be a fair amount. Unless you eat the whole watermelon or something, then okay, you've got an issue.
there are a
sorry.
lot of myths attached to diabetes.
Yes, absolutely.
And
yeah.
people, the moment they're diagnosed, they just cut out certain things
Yeah.
that may be good for them.
Yeah.
And they continue to eat a few things that may not be good for them at all.
Yes,
What are
absolutely.
these myths?
So the myth is often very much that they consider sweet foods
Yes.
are actually the culprit with diabetes, which is not necessarily the case. And another example I often give is that essentially a chocolate bar, like an average chocolate bar, and a slice of white bread, the white bread is actually worse for glycemic index than the chocolate bar.
Wow.
So this is again the way it's digested and the components of what's in that chocolate bar and what the white bread is contributing. It's the white bread that's actually the problem in that situation. So it's the complex carbohydrates, how much you eat of them, how they're cooked, and in what form. So another example I give is a new potato, if it's boiled or steamed, is actually a medium GI. It can have a fairly response on your blood sugar levels. If you then have a chip or a fry, it's a high GI. So it's quite confusing. I have to
The way
say.
of cooking is also so important.
Massively, yeah, also very important. Anything boiling and steaming are always favoured. Baking tends to make things go into like the medium or to the high. Frying, you're normally always looking at a high, bad response, especially with someone with diabetes.
What about rice?
So rice is again one that can shift in some of the glycemic index. Generally, you're always steaming or boiling it, which is often a good method
White
of cooking.
rice.
Yes. However, white rice would have a higher glycemic index
Than wild rice or brown?
Wild and brown, exactly, yeah. So, and that's because of the refining process. So it's the same essentially with brown and white bread as well. They're white, when anything's refined, it's essentially doing half of the digestion for you. It's making things simpler. And so, it's stripping a lot of its naturally occurring substances. And when we talk about complex carbohydrates, that they tend to be bundles and quite intricately linked, when you refine something, you're releasing it slightly. You've already done a bit of the process. That means your body, when it digests it and absorbing it, it's already slightly easier, which means it's going to go into the blood quicker. And if you have a large volume of that, you've then got a high glycemic index response.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it, yeah.
So brown rice is better than white.
And also the way we boil it.
Yes, yeah. So you can steam it. Steaming is actually often the best way to cook it.
Cook it.
Yeah. Fried rice, no. That's when it goes into the high glycemic index again.
So if they crave for sweets, is there anything that they can have?
It's a difficult subject because sweets are sweets essentially. But there are definitely healthier options than others. Again, when you're looking at shop-bought pastries and confectioneries, things like croissants and all those kind of sweet treats like that, they'll always have a high glycemic index. In those circumstances, try to limit yourself to not eat too much of them either.
Portion control.
Yeah, portion control big time. Fresh fruit it's still something to consider because like I said with the watermelon, it can actually have quite a high glycemic index. But if you keep fruit in its whole form, a lot of fruits have got high fiber content. When a food has a high fiber content, going back to this complexity again, it takes a while for it to break down. So that sugar doesn't go into the system so quickly. So things like apples and stuff like that, they have the skin, the pectin in the skin is a high fiber. Your body has to work for this that little bit more than
That's better for your body.
than a free sugar. Yeah, so it's not as rapid and into the thing.
What about juices?
Juices, I'm a little bit of a skeptic to this juice scene at the moment, and I see a lot that people advocate juices, and in my eyes, essentially what you're doing when you take any fruit and juice it, you are taking that complex form again and you are blending it straight into a sugar.
Absolutely, and making it easier for it to go in your stomach
It's
and go
essentially
into
like
your
liquid
bloodstream.
sugar. Yeah, absolutely. Your body has no digestion process whatsoever. That will be absorbed immediately as a sugar and go straight into the bloodstream. And people may argue that, okay, if you're using fresh fruit, there may be some vitamins and minerals associated with that, but we shouldn't be taking them in the form of a liquid drink.
Exactly.
People need to get used to actually eating fruit and enjoying it again. It's very rare you see people pick up a piece of fruit and actually enjoy it.
It is becoming rarer.
Yeah, especially with children.
Especially with children.
It's quite hard.
Absolutely, I was just coming.
But essentially, when you process a food, any food, the minute you've taken it from its form, any kind of processing, whether you steam, boil, bake, blend, you're removing it from its natural form. And when you blend something, you've essentially broken down everything within it. Yep. There's no digestion process there anymore.
And a lot of times we have multiple glasses of orange juice with our breakfast, which is pure sugar, I'm guessing.
Pure sugar. And going back to the recommendations, that people should only really be having around 10 to 12 teaspoons of sugar, of which table sugar, but also fruit sugar contributes. They recommend no more than 1 glass of juice a day and a maximum size of 250 ml, which is about your average glass size. And that's just for 1 a day. And that can actually, in fact, most of the time in a standard glass of orange juice, there can be up to 6 teaspoons of sugar. And that comes naturally from the fruit, but considering we're only supposed to be having around 10 to 12, that's nearly half your intake through a juice. And like we said before, there's no digestion process, it's straight into the blood, straight in, out, and not really much going to the body.
Just adding calories.
Yeah, whereas if you ate the orange, just one orange.
Yes.
They normally have
much better.
Yeah, you've got the fibre from the pith and everything, and it normally has about around 4 tablespoons maximum, depending on the ripeness of the fruit. So you've actually removed a few teaspoons of sugar there, and you've got the fibre, which means the digestion is slower and it doesn't go as rapidly into the bloodstream.
Well, thank you. That's amazing information. I'm sure it's lovely. Thank you. Well, I'm sure you guys wrote it down, and as always say, please keep watching the video, and I'm sure you will learn the tips that she's given, and that's the whole idea of doing what I do. I really love to pass on all the things that I learned to all of you. Keep writing to me. I love to hear from you. Love you guys.